Traditionally, of course, and I think one can see why, that the whole problem of evil, as it's called, is really the central objection against belief in God. And I can very much sympathise with people's gut feeling on that, which you might even say, given that it seems to me very difficult to believe in a God given all this evil and suffering, doesn't that sort of put the burden of proof via the principle of credulity on the believer to explain how come it's reasonable to believe in God, given all this evil in the world? When you actually try and construct an argument that tries to bear out that intuition, though, you find out how difficult it is to sustain it, and how much can actually be said on the other side of the issue. Good and evil are obviously opposed to one another, but they are not, I think, equal opposites, as it were. I think there's an asymmetrical relationship rather than a symmetrical relationship between good and evil, inasmuch as it would be possible for just goodness to exist. And indeed, believing in God, I think the original fact of reality is a purely good fact, the maximally great being God existing. Evil is, if you like, parasitic upon goodness. There can't be any evil unless there is some goodness, but there can be goodness in the complete absence of evil. So they're not equal opposite forces that are sort of just balancing one another out through eternity. The logical problem of evil is the kind of traditional argument from evil against God that says, given the existence of any evil at all, it is impossible for there to be a God of the kind that the traditional religious believers believe in, a God who is all good and all knowing and all powerful, who created this universe. That there is a logical inconsistency between holding a belief in God and holding a belief in the existence of evil, and that since it's blatantly obvious that there really is evil, it's therefore blatantly obvious that there's no God. Even amongst contemporary agnostic and atheist philosophers of religion, the majority of philosophers of religion today say that that argument is just a busted flush. It doesn't work. There is no logical contradiction. It is possible for evil and God as traditionally conceived to coexist. Given that it's possible for God and evil to coexist, most people wanting to mount some sort of argument from evil against God have moved on to making what's called a evidential or probabilistic argument from evil that says, okay, it's possible for God and evil to coexist, but isn't the existence of evil, or perhaps the existence of so much evil, or perhaps the existence of certain types of evil, something that counts against the existence of God, that is, if you like, something that you can put in one of in the negative balance pan in the discussion about whether or not there's a God. And that image itself brings up the fact that even if you think evil counts against God, because it's not a knockdown logical disproof, you still then have to take into account, well, what are the arguments for belief in God? And weighing up the arguments for and against. So it's not as straightforward as just pointing to evil and saying, that settles the discussion, we don't need to think about it anymore. Very key to the contemporary discussion about the problem of evil is this distinction between mounting a defence against the problem of evil or giving a theodicy. A defence is simply showing that an argument from evil doesn't carry its conclusion, doesn't sustain the conclusion that it's trying to put forward. A theodicy is an attempt to really explain why it is that God and evil coexist. So a defence might put forward a possible way in which God and evil coexist in order to prove that God and evil could possibly coexist as a way of defending theistic belief against the logical problem of evil, say. But the defence doesn't need to put forward a theory of the coexistence of God and evil that is claimed to be plausibly true, or to be the actual way in which God and evil can coexist. All it needs to put forward is a possible way, because it's objecting to the argument that says there is no possible way in which, because there's a contradiction in. So you can show that there isn't a contradiction by putting forward a possible way in which God and evil can coexist, without having to think that that is actually how God and evil coexist, or even that that is a terribly plausible theory of how God and evil coexist. When you move on to further discussions, perhaps theodicy becomes more to the fore.